They told everyone I was jealous, that I was bitter dramatic overreacting while they stood by my sister's side smiling for photographs. But the truth is, I was lying in a hospital bed, my spine split open, my life hanging by a thread, and they chose her graduation over my survival. However, what they didn't expect was that the daughter they left behind would rise stronger and one day confront them in public. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Now let's begin. I grew up on the wet side of Portland where the rule in our house was simple. I was the big sister, and big sisters did not need things. Eleanor, 2 years younger, needed everything, or at least that was the family story. If she whimpered, my mother drifted to her. If I spoke up, my father said, "Abby, be a big girl." My 7th birthday taught the lesson fast. We'd planned 5 friends and mint chip at the ice cream parlor on Hawthorne. That morning, Eleanor decided she wanted the Children's Museum. Within an hour, my party was canceled. Moms were called. Balloons sagged. We spent the day following Eleanor through exhibits while my father whispered that making my sister happy should make me happy too. The script replayed. Eleanor's birthdays had themes and custom cakes and a guest list that swallowed our backyard. Mine had caveats. If her recital landed the same weekend, my party moved or shrank or disappeared. She blew out 3 tiers of buttercream. Mine were cupcakes bought on the drive home. When I brought home straight A's, my mother slid the report card into the important papers folder with a polite smile. When Eleanor clawed her way to a B in algebra, we went out for pie because progress deserves celebration. I learned to read their eyes for the weather, sunny for Eleanor, overcast for me. So I learned to keep victories quiet. I studied with headphones while Eleanor practiced in the hall. I took the bus to the library because the house was too noisy to concentrate. The librarians knew my name before my parents learned the bus schedule. By high school, I stacked advanced classes, joined science club, and wore a volunteer badge at the hospital 3 afternoons a week. I loved the air, their clean, purposeful people whose attention was a duty, not a prize. For a few hours, I wasn't the backup daughter. Senior spring, the favoritism got a price tag. I had been saving for a competitive summer medical program tip jar shifts at the cafe, babysitting weekend inventory at a bookstore. 2 weeks before the deposit was due, my parents sat at the kitchen table with the "we've discussed this" look. "We're going to redirect your fund." My mother said the word redirect, a corporate way to say taking. Eleanor had been accepted last minute to an exclusive arts program in Europe. "She needs this for her development," my father said. "You'll get scholarships anyway." I stared at the wet ring under my glass and thought, this is the part where I say, okay, because there is no alternative. So I said okay. I added a second job and let the program go. Eleanor posted photos from Paris with captions about how our parents believed in her dreams. I turned off notifications and learned how to believe in mine without witnesses. On paper, we looked fine. Craftsman house with peeling blue paint, a tilted basketball hoop. Polite questions over dinner I learned to answer in short sentences. We said grace about gratitude and humility. I repeated the words and practiced both. Loving them was not hard. Feeling seen by them was. There were splinters I couldn't shake. My state science fair fell on the same day as Eleanor's dance prelims. My parents skipped my final round because she could use the confidence boost. I won first place and slid the ribbon into a backpack pocket like contraband. Eleanor borrowed my college essay to proofread and spilled coffee on it the night before it was due. We reprinted it on the crusty family printer, and I turned it in with dried streaks, a watermark of priority. Still, I collected competencies. I could triage a to-do list in my head, make dinner for 4 with $10, and remember the neighbor's cat's insulin schedule. I learned that my worth wouldn't arrive as applause. It would be built from habits no one saw. Resilience. Independence. The American math of making more from less. When I was accepted into a top pre-med program, we celebrated on a Tuesday because Eleanor had finals Friday, and weekends stressed her out. We ate takeout Thai. My mother read the letter and said, "We're proud of you." Then turned to Eleanor and asked about her group project. Eleanor said she might want to try medicine too, but like the non-gross parts. My father launched into how we could help her explore that. I washed dishes, hot water hiding my face. If you hear bitterness, understand that I also adored my sister in ways that made no sense. She could be funny and reckless and generous in sudden bursts. She once stayed up with me when I had the flu, laying cool washcloths on my forehead like a penance she didn't name. Love made the rest more confusing, not less. By the time I packed for college, my plan had no magic outwork. The noise, build a life that didn't require permission, become the person who shows up because I knew exactly how it felt when others didn't. It felt practical, almost patriotic, the kind of personal freedom we recite in civics class, but have to manufacture in private. I kept my head down and my grades up. I shadowed surgeons and memorized the choreography of scrub-in and sterile field. The hospital became my map. Wash your hands, ask better questions. Don't promise what you can't deliver, and when someone is scared, sit so your eyes are level. At home, nothing changed. Eleanor's birthday that year had a rented photo booth and a theme color. Mine had leftovers and Tupperware. When I blew out a single tea candle stuck in a grocery store cupcake, I wished for a back strong enough to carry me out of the story I'd been assigned. I didn't know my back had its own story already writing itself in quiet, dangerous ink. I didn't know it would test every rule I'd learned about love and loyalty and what it costs to be the responsible one. I thought I had accepted my place as the forgotten daughter until the day my spine gave out. By my final year of medical school, the pain had become a shadow that followed me everywhere. It started as an ache in my lower back during long study nights, but by 22 it had evolved into lightning bolts of fire racing down my legs, leaving me gasping. I told myself I could manage, future surgeons didn't collapse. Then one April evening, in the middle of reviewing case studies at my apartment, I reached for a textbook and my world folded. The pain detonated, stealing my breath, buckling me to the floor. I lay there, paralyzed, eyes watering, unable to feel my right foot. An hour later, my roommate found me. Panic in her voice, then sirens. The ER smelled like disinfectant and fear. MRIs revealed what I had dreaded, a massive disc herniation, fragments compressing my spinal cord. The neurosurgeon didn't soften it. You need surgery immediately. Waiting even a week could mean permanent nerve damage, paralysis. His words landed like scalpels. The date, May 15th. It was already circled on our family calendar, not for me, but for Eleanor's college graduation. For months it had been the only topic at home, her cap and gown fittings, her senior trip, the hotel block booked for relatives. Now it was also my survival date. That night I dialed home with trembling fingers. Mom. Dad. I said, my voice uneven. They're scheduling emergency spinal surgery, May 15th. I need you here. I tried to make them understand it wasn't optional, it wasn't cosmetic. The fragments could shift any second. I'm scared, I admitted, words I had never spoken to them. Please. Silence filled the line long enough that my pulse spiked. Finally, my mother said carefully, "That's Eleanor's graduation." My father added, "She's worked 4 years for this. It's her day." I could lose the ability to walk, I whispered. This is my spine. I don't have another. You'll be in good hands, my father said. You're in a hospital. The doctors will take care of you. I tried again, desperation turning my voice raw. I don't need just doctors. I need my family. But my mother sighed into the receiver. You know how important this moment is for Eleanor. She needs us there. You'll be fine. We'll fly back the next morning. The final blow came from Eleanor herself when she took the phone. Her voice dripped with practiced hurt. I can't believe you're trying to ruin this for me, Abby. You always want attention. Can't you reschedule? Just a few days? It's not a haircut, I said. It's emergency spinal surgery. Well, I'm sorry about your back thing, she sniffed. But the entire class expects Mom and Dad to be there. What would it look like if they left? The call ended with my begging dissolving into static, their decision sealed. Eleanor's milestone mattered more than my spine. The morning of May 15th arrived gray and unkind. My friend drove me to the hospital at dawn, her silence louder than comfort. In pre-op, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a nurse handed me the clipboard. List your emergency contact. My hand shook. For a second, I hovered over Mother before scrawling my roommate's name instead. When they asked, "Will family be joining you?" the lump in my throat nearly choked me. I shook my head. "No family," I whispered. The nurse gave me a long look, but said nothing. They wheeled me into a corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and floor wax. Around me, patients murmured to loved ones, hands held cheeks, kissed, whispered promises of, "See you soon." I had silence. The chair beside my gurney stayed empty, a hollow reminder of where my parents should have been. The anesthesiologist leaned down, his voice gentle. "Count backward from 10. I tried, but my vision blurred. The weight of abandonment pressed heavier than the straps on my arms. As the anesthesia pulled me under, the last thing I saw wasn't my parents' faces, it was the empty chair beside me. The surgery was supposed to last 4 hours. It stretched to 7. Somewhere in the blur of monitors and masked faces, my blood pressure dropped so low the anesthesiologist barked at the team to prepare for a crash cart. Twice I hovered near the edge. The fragments of disc pressing into my spinal cord were worse than the scans had shown. They cut deeper fused bone where they hadn't planned to work dangerously close to nerves that controlled everything below my waist. I wouldn't know any of this until later. At the time, I knew only blackness and the thin pull of a life that nearly slipped. When consciousness returned, it was like surfacing through fire. My spine felt carved open, a molten line down my back. Every breath scraped. My legs tingled with an ache that was almost worse than numbness. I forced my eyes open, hoping for familiar silhouettes. My mother's perfume. My father's steady baritone. At least Eleanor's laugh drifting in. But the chairs beside my bed sat empty metal legs gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The nurse checking my vitals noticed me stirring. "You're awake, honey." Her eyes softened behind the mask. She adjusted my IV, then asked, "Do you want me to bring your family in?" "No family," I whispered, voice breaking. She frowned slightly but didn't press. She squeezed my hand once, then went back to charting. I turned my head, each millimeter of movement igniting sparks along my spine, and reached for my phone on the tray. No missed calls, no texts asking how the surgery had gone. But when I opened social media, the truth hit harder than any scalpel. My feed overflowed with photos of Eleanor in cap and gown, my parents beaming at her sides. There they were at the ceremony, at the brunch afterward, at the party lit with champagne flutes. My mother's caption: "So proud of our beautiful graduate, our family's most special day." I stared at the word family. Tears blurred the images until they swam into cruel mosaics. While I fought for mobility, while my blood pressure flatlined twice, they smiled into cameras. The empty chair beside me told the rest. I didn't hear the footsteps until a soft voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." I turned to see a nurse sliding into the chair my parents should have filled. She was young, maybe mid-20s, auburn hair tucked under her cap name tag reading Rachel Winters. "My shift ended 2 hours ago," she admitted with a shrug. "But first nights after spinal surgery are brutal. Pain spikes, panic, disorientation. Nobody should go through that without someone sitting here." Her presence cracked something in me. The tears came hot and fast, spilling into my hairline. She didn't flinch. She adjusted my blanket, silenced the relentless beep of a monitor, and when the agony spiked, she distracted me with stories about her younger brother who'd once painted the dog blue. When words failed, she simply sat steady and present the way family should have been. At one point, I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Rachel hesitated, then said, "When I was 14, my brother died of leukemia. The night he passed, a nurse stayed with us long after her shift ended. She couldn't fix it, but she made the worst night of our lives bearable. I promised myself I'd do the same someday." Her words burrowed deep. She wasn't obligated by blood. She wasn't bound by history. Yet here she was, showing up when it mattered. That night stretched endless. Pain meds dulled but never erased the fire along my spine. My phone lit up with more photos from Eleanor's celebration. No one thought to ask how I was breathing. No one cared if I could walk again. somewhere between midnight and dawn, staring at the ceiling tiles. I made a decision that felt like severing a rope. The thread tethering me to my family had been fraying for years, missed birthdays, stolen funds, erased victories. But now it snapped. The one time I had explicitly begged them to show up, they chose a stage and a diploma over their daughter's spine. Over her life. I swallowed hard against the truth. I could no longer expect love from them in the ways that mattered. I could no longer beg. From this moment forward, I would not depend on them for comfort, for validation, for presence. I would survive without them. Rachel dozed lightly in the chair, chin resting on her palm, still there even off the clock. I studied her in the dim light, and understood something sharp. Family wasn't defined by last names or shared photos. It was defined by who sat with you in the dark when the pain tried to swallow you. My body was stitched with titanium and bone grafts, my nerves raw, my future uncertain. But my heart felt cleaner than it had in years. The girl they left behind on that table died that night, and someone stronger took her place. Boston greeted me with sharp wind and brick streets that felt older than anything in Portland. 3 months after surgery, still stiff from physical therapy, I arrived with 2 suitcases, a stack of textbooks, and the stubborn conviction that I would never look back. Boston Memorial had accepted me into their residency program, a prestigious, punishing gauntlet I had dreamed of since high school. If Portland was where I had been overlooked, Boston would be where I made myself impossible to ignore. The hospital itself breathed ambition. Marble lobby floors, portraits of pioneering physicians staring down with stern approval. My badge felt heavier than its plastic weight. Chief of Neurosurgery. Dr. William Harrison introduced himself on day 1. "You've survived more than most of our patients," he said after learning about my spinal fusion. "The best doctors never forget what it's like to be on the other side of the scalpel. Use it." I did. While other residents dragged their feet after 70-hour weeks, I stayed late reviewing scans, asking for extra cases, shadowing complex procedures. Dr. Harrison noticed. By the end of my first year, he was calling me into his office to debate surgical techniques like I was already a colleague. Later, when he retired, his successor, Dr. Jonathan Phillips, carried the torch, pushing me harder, but also defending me when my perfectionism bled into self-punishment. Between the two of them, I grew not just as a surgeon, but as a professional who understood resilience wasn't about pretending to be unbreakable, it was about refusing to stay broken. Rachel reappeared like fate itself. Fresh from passing her boards, she had taken a nursing job at Boston Memorial. The same girl who once sat in a plastic chair beside my hospital bed was suddenly beside me again in scrubs, handing me charts and cracking dry jokes in the middle of 12-hour shifts. She became my anchor in those years of exhaustion, proof that family could be chosen, steady, earned. The circle widened. Dr. Lisa Chun from cardiology invited me to Thanksgiving when she learned I had nowhere to go. Dr. Marcus Wallace from emergency medicine became my late-night coffee ally, trading horror stories of cases that almost unraveled us. Slowly, Boston built me a network thicker than blood, colleagues who respected me, friends who called me out when I pushed too hard, people who celebrated my victories without resentment. And then there was James. He came from Chicago General, an orthopedic surgeon with a quiet steadiness that cut through the chaos. We met during a complicated spinal case, his hands precise, his voice calm as he adjusted retraction angles. Outside the OR, he asked if I wanted coffee. That coffee became walks along the Charles River evenings, dissecting medical journals, the kind of slow trust I thought I'd forgotten how to give. When I told him my history, Eleanor's shadow, the surgery, the abandonment, he didn't try to fix it or insist on reconciliation. He simply took my hand and said, "Their loss is immeasurable." For once, I felt understood without explanation. Meanwhile, Eleanor's updates filtered through short, perfunctory calls with my parents. She had tried pre-med, then switched to communications, then business, then finally landed on hospital administration like medicine, but without the gross parts. Jobs came and went, rarely lasting more than 8 months. My parents, ever faithful to their golden child, funded her apartments, paid her credit cards, even covered her rent when she quit abruptly. Conversations with them were transactional. They asked about Eleanor's new boyfriend, Eleanor's job interview, Eleanor's stress. When I mentioned publishing my first research paper or assisting Dr. Harrison on a breakthrough spinal procedure, my mother would murmur, "That's nice," and pivot back to Eleanor's latest crisis. I stopped offering details. Instead, I leaned on the people in Boston who noticed who showed up. The irony was not lost on me. My parents' financial support flowed endlessly toward Eleanor, yet their retirement funds dwindled. Mine was a life built on loans, scholarships, 14-hour shifts, and a body held together by titanium rods. Still, I had something she didn't: earned success. The kind of triumph born of grit and discipline. The American promise fulfilled not by inheritance or indulgence, but by clawing my way forward no matter how many times the ground collapsed. By my 3rd year, I was promoted to chief resident, an unheard-of honor for my age. Dr. Phillips explained it simply. Clinical skill is one thing, but your patients trust you. You've changed the culture here. It was the kind of validation my childhood self had craved from my parents, but now it came from people who had actually seen me fight, bleed, and build. Life in Boston felt like proof. Proof that abandonment had not destroyed me. Proof that resilience mattered more than favoritism. Proof that I was not the forgotten daughter, but a woman who carved out her own worth. And then, 6 years after the day my parents left me in that recovery room, I walked into Boston Memorial's lobby for morning rounds, coffee in hand, and froze. Across the polished floor, arm hooked through a designer handbag, hairstyled in a glossy wave, stood Eleanor Richards. My past wearing a suit and my last name had just walked back into my hospital. Her heels clicked across the marble lobby like she owned the place, surprised. Eleanor spread her arms as though we'd been close all along. I froze, gripping my coffee so tightly the cardboard bent. "Eleanor," I said carefully, my voice flat. "What brings you to Boston?" "My interview, of course," she said with a bright grin. "Didn't HR tell you I'm up for the new director position, patient experience and administrative efficiency?" She said the title like she'd been practicing in the mirror for weeks. I blinked. "You applied here without mentioning it to me." She waved dismissively. "I wanted it to be a surprise. Can't you just picture it, the Richards sisters taking over Boston Memorial together?" I stepped back, her perfume cloying. "I serve on the hiring committee for that role, which means I'll be recusing myself from your preliminary interviews." Her smile faltered. "Recusing yourself? Why would you do that?" "Professional integrity," I said. "It would be a conflict of interest." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Abby. That's just for show. Everyone knows people help family behind the scenes. All I'm asking is for a little nudge." I met her gaze steady. "That's not how this hospital operates, and it's not how I operate." Her lips thinned. "Seriously? You're not going to help me at all. I'll evaluate you as I would any candidate objectively." Her posture stiffened. "After everything our parents did for you, you owe me." I barked a laugh. "What exactly do you think they did for me? Most of my education was scholarships and loans. They saved their resources for you." She ignored that. "You've got this fancy career, this big hospital. You can't even put in a good word for your only sister. Your qualifications will speak for themselves." Her voice softened, took on that pleading lilt I remembered from childhood. "Please, Abby. Things are complicated at home. Mom and Dad, they can't keep supporting me. I need this." I inhaled slowly. "So you followed me across the country and applied at my hospital?" "It makes sense," she said quickly. "I have experience in administration. You're already established here," and she leaned closer, her tone conspiratorial. "This job is perfect for me. Besides, it gives us a chance to reconnect. Don't you miss having family around?" The question pierced, though. I refused to let her see it. I had missed family, but not the version she offered. "I've built my life here," I said. If you want to be part of it, it will be on terms of mutual respect, not manipulation." She sat back, her smile curdling. "You're really still holding on to that old surgery thing, aren't you, Abby? It was just a back procedure. And look, you're fine now." Her words sliced clean through me. Just a back procedure. I remembered the crash cart, the 7-hour operation, Rachel's hand in mine when my family wasn't there. Fine was a titanium rod in my spine and nights I couldn't get out of bed without crying. Fine was clawing through medical school while my parents posted graduation photos of her. I forced calm into my voice. It wasn't just a back procedure. It nearly killed me. She gave a little shrug like I was exaggerating. "You always make things so dramatic." For a heartbeat, I thought about ending it there, walking away. But then I remembered her beaming confidence when she strutted into my hospital lobby, assuming the world would bend again to her needs. No, not this time. She thought I would finally make her life easier. Instead, I was about to show her what consequences feel like. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. 5 of us sat around the table, Dr. Phillips at the head, Diane from HR, Dr. Patel from internal medicine, Marcus, the outgoing patient services director, and me. 3 candidates were scheduled. Eleanor was last. When Diane opened the door at 9:30 sharp, Eleanor swept in like she owned the floor. Charcoal gray suit, pearl earrings, hair immaculate. She shook hands smoothly, pausing dramatically when she reached me. "Dr. Richards," she said, her smirk flickering like a private joke. "Ms. Richards," I replied, keeping my tone clinical. Dr. Phillips started. "Tell us about your background and philosophy of patient experience." Eleanor launched into a polished narrative. She spoke of innovative solutions of bridging the gap between patients and providers. She even sprinkled in buzzwords about empathy and efficiency like she'd memorized a script. The panel nodded politely. Then came the moment that made my pulse spike. "My sister, Dr. Richards, actually inspired me," Eleanor said with a practiced smile in my direction. Watching her journey showed me how important it is to remember patients are more than charts. That's why I chose healthcare administration. My jaw stayed locked, but inside I burned. Inspired. The same sister who called my surgery just a back procedure now used my scars as resume padding. When it was my turn, I forced my voice steady. "Ms. Richards, this position requires balancing efficiency with compassion. How would you ensure one doesn't compromise the other?" She turned her gaze to me, eyes glittering. By listening, she said smoothly, "Validation is the first step. Patients deserve to feel heard. That's something Abby Dr. Richards taught me." The audacity almost knocked the breath from me. I nodded politely, then pressed. "Could you describe a specific situation in which you personally implemented such a balance? Details of the challenge, your actions, and measurable outcomes." She hesitated, then cobbled together a story about mediating between doctors and administrators at her last job. Her phrasing sounded rehearsed. Dr. Patel scribbled something on his notepad. By the time the interview ended, Eleanor had dazzled just enough to seem competent, but not enough to hide the thinness of her experience. The panel moved on, but I could feel Dr. Phillips watching me closely as if measuring my restraint. We finished with the other candidates, one solid, one exceptional. By afternoon, the deliberations leaned clearly towards Zara, the Hopkins candidate whose track record was undeniable. Eleanor landed squarely in third, but Eleanor didn't know that. When the panel recessed for lunch, she intercepted me in the hallway. "Well," she asked, eagerly tugging at her blazer sleeve. "You know I can't discuss the committee's impressions," I said. Her smile curdled. "Don't pull that ethics line with me again. You could tell them I'd be great here. You could tip it my way." "That's not how this works, Eleanor." Her voice rose sharp enough to turn heads. "God, you're still punishing me for that stupid surgery. It was years ago. You're fine now." The words hit like a physical slap. And that was when Rachel rounded the corner, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing as she recognized Eleanor. "You're Eleanor," Rachel said flatly. Eleanor blinked. "Do I know you?" Rachel's voice stayed cool, but her eyes blazed. "No, but I know you. I was Abby's recovery nurse, the one who stayed with her all night because her family didn't bother to show up. Eleanor's mouth parted, but no sound came. I was there when her blood pressure crashed twice, when she cried from pain and scrolled through graduation photos instead of messages from her parents. I was there when she fought through complications that could have paralyzed her. And where were you? Posting selfies. The hallway went silent. Eleanor's cheeks flushed pink. That's not Mom and Dad said it was routine. Rachel cut her off. Routine. That surgery nearly killed her. But sure, tell yourself it was just a back procedure. My throat tightened, but I stood straighter. For 6 years, Rachel had been the only one who knew. Now the truth was bleeding into daylight where Eleanor couldn't spin it away. Eleanor's eyes flashed panic. You don't understand. I need this job. Her hand shot to her phone. I'm calling Mom and Dad. They'll set the record straight. Minutes later, the echo of familiar voices carried down the hall. My parents, older now but no less commanding, marched toward us. My father's expression was stern, my mother's indignant. We need to talk, my mother said sharply. Eleanor called us. She says you're sabotaging her career out of spite. Sabotaging. My voice came out low, calm. The committee will decide based on qualifications. My father stepped forward. Abigail, surely you can influence this. She's your sister. Family should help family. The irony nearly made me laugh. Family. Where had that word been when I begged them to hold my hand before surgery? Abby, my mother insisted, be reasonable. Eleanor needs this position. You don't understand how hard things have been for her. Something inside me cracked open. For years I had swallowed silence, let them frame me as strong and Eleanor as fragile. But here in the halls of the life I had built without them, I finally let the truth spill. You want to know why I won't bend the rules for her? My voice rose sharp enough to turn heads again. Because I nearly died while you smiled for photographs. The hallway froze around us. My parents stared speechless. Eleanor's mouth worked soundlessly. Rachel stood at my side, steady as stone. For the first time I told them the truth. I nearly died while they smiled for photographs. The decision came down in the late afternoon. Diane from HR gathered the candidates in the waiting area one by one to deliver the verdicts. Zara, the Hopkins candidate, was offered the position. Michael Thornton was named the backup. And Eleanor, my sister, the golden child, was politely told she had not been selected. I didn't witness the moment, but I didn't need to. 20 minutes later, the door to my office slammed open hard enough to rattle the framed diplomas on the wall. Eleanor stormed in, her face blotched, red eyes wild with betrayal. You sabotaged me, she shouted. I knew it. You sat in there with your smug little notes, poisoning them against me. I stayed seated, my voice calm. The committee's decision was unanimous. Eleanor, you weren't the most qualified candidate. That's all. Her hands balled into fists. You just couldn't stand to see me succeed in your precious hospital. You've always been jealous, always trying to prove you're better than me. The words echoed off the sterile walls, but this time they didn't pierce. I had heard them too many times before. This isn't about jealousy, I said quietly. It's about qualifications. Zara had experience you don't. Her eyes brimmed, though anger kept the tears from falling. I needed this, Abby. Do you understand? I needed it. Mom and Dad are drowning because of me. They've been paying my rent, my bills, my credit cards. Everything. They're talking about selling the house. And now... Her voice cracked, breaking through the fury. Now I've got nothing. For the first time, Eleanor didn't look like the polished golden child. She looked like someone stripped bare, the scaffolding of entitlement collapsing around her. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. She sank into the chair opposite mine, breathing hard. They can't help me anymore, she admitted finally. They're broke. All those years of bailing me out, it's gone. Their retirement, their savings, everything. The words landed heavy but not surprising. I had seen it coming for years. My parents had poured everything into preserving Eleanor's image while telling me to rely on grit, Now the bill had arrived and they couldn't cover it. That night, the storm continued at my apartment. My phone buzzed with 3 missed calls from my mother, 1 from my father. When I finally answered, their voices carried a note I had never heard before: humility. "We've been meeting with a counselor," my father confessed awkwardly. "She called it golden child syndrome. Said we favored Eleanor to her detriment and ignored your needs. We didn't see it, Abby. Not then. But we're starting to now." I sat at my kitchen table staring at the city lights outside the window. It was surreal hearing my parents admit the truth I had known my whole life. Part of me wanted to scream that it was too late. Another part wanted to believe them. Eleanor, meanwhile, spiraled lower before she found footing. She called me 2 weeks later, her voice stripped of its usual gloss. "I started therapy," she said simply. "Twice a week. My therapist says I built my whole life on shortcuts. That I don't actually have skills. Just expectations." She gave a bitter laugh. "Turns out being the favorite is a terrible education." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was something. A month later, she texted, "Got hired at Mercy General. Entry-level patient advocacy coordinator. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but real. I'm learning how to listen to patients and actually do the grunt work," she told me over coffee one Saturday. Her eyes were tired, but her smile was unpracticed, smaller, more genuine. And my parents. They kept going to counseling. They admitted they had drained their finances protecting Eleanor from every consequence. "We thought we were loving her," my mother said during one stilted call. "We see now we were crippling her. I didn't rush to forgive. The wounds were too deep. But I listened. For the first time in years, I listened. It was strange, like watching a house collapse only to see seedlings pushing through the wreckage. Eleanor didn't ask me to call in favors anymore. She didn't beg me to smooth her path. She talked about the challenges of her new role, how patients yelled at her, how doctors brushed her off, how humbling it was to be on the bottom rung. And she didn't complain. She accepted it. One evening, as we parted outside a cafe, she paused. "I'm not asking you for help, Abby," she said carefully. "Not shortcuts, not strings. Just, could you give me time? A chance to prove I can be different?" For a moment, I saw not the sister who had stolen every spotlight, but the woman she was becoming, flawed, humbled, trying. For the first time in my life, my sister wasn't asking for shortcuts. She was asking for a chance to change. Rebuilding didn't happen with fireworks or sweeping speeches. It happened in the smallest, most ordinary ways: cups of coffee in corner cafes, awkward silences bridged by tentative questions, and the slow drip of time softening old edges. Eleanor and I began meeting every other Saturday. The first time she arrived late, flustered hair windblown, apologizing for traffic. I almost left before she got there, but something kept me in my seat. We ordered coffee, sat across from each other, and for once she didn't fill the air with excuses or glossy stories. She just said, "I don't blame you for hating me. I earned it." Her words startled me more than any performance could have. Over the months, she stopped talking about dreams of grand promotions and instead shared the gritty details of her entry-level role at Mercy General. She described cranky patients who took out their pain on her long nights juggling paperwork and supervisors who gave her no special treatment. And she didn't complain. She admitted she deserved the humbling. "I used to think I was owed success," she confessed one morning, stirring cream into her coffee. "Like if I showed up, people would hand it to me. But I've started volunteering at the community clinic. No title, no paycheck, just folding pamphlets, calling patients, sitting with people who are scared. It's the first time I've felt useful in years." I studied her across the table, looking for cracks in the performance. But her eyes held no glitter of manipulation, only exhaustion and something new: accountability. By the following year, she was helping to draft new patient advocacy protocols at Mercy, focused on making sure families were properly contacted before major procedures. "No one should have to go through what you did," she told me softly. "Not ever again." Hearing my experience reframed as a standard for change was strange but powerful. For the first time, Eleanor wasn't borrowing my story for her benefit. She was using it to help others. Meanwhile, my parents surprised me with something I never expected: an email. Not a phone call full of rationalizations, not a letter soaked in guilt, but a message written simply humbly. Abby, it began. We have spent the past year in counseling, and the hardest part has been facing what we did to you. We abandoned you at the hospital. We chose convenience over your life. There is no excuse for it. We can't undo the harm, but we want you to know we see it now. We are sorry. We are not asking for forgiveness, only the chance to tell you that the way we treated you was wrong. I read the message 3 times, fingers trembling on the keyboard. My parents, who once brushed off my achievements, who excused Eleanor's every misstep, had finally named the betrayal I'd carried alone for so long. They weren't demanding absolution. They were acknowledging reality. For days I didn't reply. I wanted to. I also wanted to hurl my laptop across the room. The wound was still there, scarred but tender, and I wasn't sure their words could ever make it right. And yet, when Eleanor and I met for coffee again, I heard myself saying, "They wrote to me." She nodded slowly. I asked them to. I told them that if they wanted even a chance at knowing you again, they had to stop pretending it didn't happen. That admission landed heavy. For once, Eleanor hadn't used our parents as shields. She had held them accountable too. The more time we spent together, the more I realized she wasn't trying to erase the past with apologies or promises. She was building something different: new habits, new actions, new humility. She asked about my cases, and when I told her about a particularly difficult spinal fusion, she didn't try to compare it to her own life. She just listened. She started sending articles she thought I'd find interesting, studies on patient experience reports on hospital transparency. Not to show off, but to learn. One afternoon, she even invited me to speak at Mercy General about trauma-informed care. Standing at the podium, I caught her in the back row, eyes wide with pride, clapping the loudest when I finished. I didn't trust it fully, not yet, but I couldn't deny the change. The sister who once demanded shortcuts was now sweeping floors at community events, staying late to sit with grieving families, and little by little shedding the golden child entitlement that had once defined her. Walking home from one of our Saturday coffees, the autumn air crisp around me, I thought about the gap between forgiveness and transformation. Forgiveness was a gift, one I wasn't ready to give. But transformation was proof. It was action. And Eleanor was finally showing me that people could change even if the change came late and hard. I wasn't sure forgiveness was possible, but transformation, maybe. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and polished glassware, the kind of place where lives were measured in applause and engraved plaques. I stood backstage, hands trembling around the note cards I had rewritten a dozen times, trying to breathe through the swirl of memories, the gurney, the empty chair. Rachel's steady hand. Tonight, I wasn't the girl who had begged her parents to come. Tonight, I was Dr. Abigail Richards, recipient of the National Award for Excellence in Spinal Trauma Care. 2 years of pioneering work of publishing protocols now adopted in hospitals nationwide, of surviving 70-hour weeks and carrying my scars into something bigger than myself, had brought me here. Dr. Richards, the stage manager, whispered, "You're on." I stepped into the lights, the applause rising like a wave. At the podium, I let it settle before speaking. I never imagined standing here. I began, my voice echoing in the vast room. 6 years ago, I was a patient on the table, terrified I would never walk again. Tonight, I stand here because of the people who carried me when I couldn't carry myself. Faces blurred in the audience, but the ones that mattered stood out like beacons. Rachel in a deep blue dress, wiping a tear she thought no one could see. James at our table near the front, his hand pressed to his heart, smiling with that steady calm that had steadied me countless times. Dr. Phillips, stern and proud, giving a small nod that meant more than words. I lifted my gaze. First to Rachel Winters, who once sat with me through the longest night of my life. You taught me that family is not always who shares your blood, but who shows up when it matters. To Dr. Jonathan Phillips, who pushed me to become the surgeon I dreamed of being. To Dr. William Harrison, who reminded me that surviving makes us better healers. And to James Carlton, my partner, my equal who reminds me daily that strength doesn't mean going it alone. The applause swelled, but I raised my hand for quiet. There was one more thing I needed to say, and I continued, my throat tightening, to my sister Eleanor Richards, for reminding me that change is possible, that accountability, no matter how late, can still rewrite a story. This award is not just for me, it is for every person who learns, falls, and chooses to stand again. In the third row, Eleanor pressed both hands to her mouth. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but for once she didn't hide them. She didn't wave, didn't posture. She just wept, humbled and proud, as the crowd's attention shifted to her. Beyond her, I caught sight of my parents. They hadn't asked to sit at my table, hadn't demanded to be part of the spotlight. They sat near the back, older now, smaller somehow, watching with eyes no longer clouded by denial. My mother's face was pale, my father's hands clasped tightly in his lap. They weren't fully part of my life, not yet, but they weren't blind anymore. And that was something. When the ceremony ended, the lights dimmed and cameras flashed. I stepped off the stage into the waiting arms of the people who had truly become my family. Rachel hugged me so fiercely I almost dropped the plaque. James kissed my forehead, whispering, "You were extraordinary." Dr. Phillips shook my hand like I was his equal, not his student. And then Eleanor approached, hesitant, mascara streaked her designer clutch dangling awkwardly at her side. "Abby," she said softly, "you didn't have to say that. About me." "I know," I answered. Her voice broke. "Thank you for believing I could change even when I gave you every reason not to." I studied her, the sister who had once left me to fight for my life alone, now standing before me, humbled, cracked open, and for the first time real. "It wasn't belief," I said gently. "It was proof. You did the work." She nodded, tears still streaming, and for once there was no performance in her grief. Only gratitude. That night, as we spilled out onto the Boston streets, cold air brushing against my skin, I realized the truth I had been circling for years. Family wasn't about DNA or photo albums or forced loyalty. Family was about who showed up in the fire. Rachel, James, Phillips, even Eleanor, now in her own imperfect way. I touched the edge of the plaque in my hand, heavy and gleaming. This award was more than recognition. It was a marker of everything I had endured and everything I had built. The past was carved into me like scar tissue, but scars don't just mark pain. They prove we survived. And with that final moment, Abigail's story closes, not with bitterness, but with the strength of scars turned into survival. If this story struck a chord, we'd love to hear your thoughts below. Subscribe to stay with us for more stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice reclaimed. We read every comment, and your voice helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Served Cold. We'll see you next time.